Welcome to Sandra's Sisterhood. I'm Carrie. This is a YouTube channel for the single and childless, not by choice person. The video today is, how has my identity evolved without children? So initially, I was really concerned and questioned and said a lot of internal dialogue to myself, really questioning whether or not I would ever be able to be happy because I don't have kids. Was I going to feel empty? And like I was missing out on a really fundamental part of life. Was I going to feel resentful and bitter about the fact that something that seemingly happens for everybody, I now know that's not true, isn't going to be a part of my life? Resenting that the happiest moments in people's lives, or that I thought were going to be the happiest moments in people's lives, were going to be something I wasn't going to be able to experience. Like, what's the point if I'm going to be alone with no kids and no family? What if I never love anybody? What if nobody ever loves me except for my mom? Those are the things that really were percolating a ton at the beginning of this sort of dawning of, oh my God, I don't think I'm going to have kids. This really isn't going to happen. And while then I was telling myself I won't have a family, now I know kids don't equal family. I had no idea how I would fit into the world, what my future would look like. How would I fit into this world where there were certain traditions and milestones that seemed to really center around people's lives and relationships that I wasn't going to be experiencing? I would have different milestones and traditions, but the ones that seem like are talked about the most, emphasized the most, that people come together around the most, weren't going to be part of my life. I wondered how many people would judge me. I judged myself, for sure. And really, it spent a lot of time wondering and questioning, what are people automatically thinking about me? And what are they assuming about me based on the fact that I'm a woman of a certain age and don't have kids and I'm not married? Like, would they assume I'm crazy? Would they assume that something's wrong with me? And that was difficult because that's not something I can control. So much would race through my mind and like tinker in my brain a lot that I wasn't even sure what I even believed. Like, what do I believe and what am I being influenced by? What am I hearing like repetitively so it feels very real and it feels like a fact? Like, I wasn't even sure like what was up and what was down. Like, it was confusing, right? Considering a life without kids, being a single woman over a certain age, and having to accept that and recognize that, and then like rethink your future, rethink what your life can look like. It's kind of like having to learn that the sky is a different color than you always thought it would be. Like, these things about how I thought my life would be just felt certain. Like, this is what everyone does. This is what being an adult is. This is what being a woman is. This is what being like getting older is. It just is. And then to be like, oh, that's not going to happen. It's like a huge fundamental shift. So if you're in that spot right now, I get it. Like, this is a very hard shift to make. And it can be done. And one of the hardest parts about that shift is you don't even know where to start because there's no blueprint for it. People aren't talking about it. Like, where do you even start? Because this just isn't something you even considered. While this video isn't about that, I would say community is a really good place to start. And surrounding yourself with others who are also going through it so you can see what's working for others. You can start to have your life normalized a little bit more. Feel validated, feel seen. That's a good place to start. Because as you're going through this process, there are a lot of, oh shit moments, right? Like, I didn't think of that, or getting triggered and the grief kind of coming at you from a lot of different directions. So that is where I think I was in terms of spending a lot of time. Now I spend less time in that spot. I won't say that I'm never in that spot, but when we talk about it as an evolution, I'm getting a little further away from it and I don't feel that as often, which feels better, feels good. And so things start to shift around that, and it can shift slowly. For me, I would say it definitely shifted slowly. But one of the things that I started to do is I started to ask, well, what if I could be okay? What if I could be happy? What if I could find things to look forward to? Like the seed just started to plant, and I started to intentionally recognize it and hear it versus burying it. I allowed some of these thoughts to linger, right? Versus immediately shutting them out or shutting them down or dismissing them because it just was too painful to even think about. And it was too painful to even consider the answers to those questions. And so then I started to allow myself to think about what the answers to those questions would be. I didn't put too much pressure on myself, but I allowed myself to sit in that a little bit longer. And eventually I started to formulate some answers. I'm still formulating those answers, but it felt like my brain was starting to look forward a little bit versus hang out in the past, in which I couldn't control anymore. So I started to actually consider what I wanted my life to be like, knowing that children weren't going to be able to be a part of it. I didn't dismiss the pain or grief all the time, but instead I really tried to latch onto this both and idea that both grief and joy can live simultaneously, or even grief and neutrality can live simultaneously. Grief and hope can live simultaneously. It was not easy. I will say that. I know that I'm speaking as if I just thought this stuff. I mean, this is stuff, it's it's like building muscles on your arms. You have to do this repetitively, consistently, and be consistent. Well, I said that. You have to practice it. The same is true for our thoughts when we're shifting some of our beliefs. So this is a constant work in progress. But even being able to do this some of the time did bring some relief and did bring some hope. Seeds of new possibilities started to be planted. And then some excitement starts to creep in a little bit, right? A tarot card reader that I see point blank just told me, stop planting the same seeds in the same place and expecting something different. And I try to remember that when I can start to feel all the negative stuff or the negative thoughts really starting to repeat themselves and getting kind of stuck in my brain. Let those thoughts pass through and plant some different seeds somewhere else. Plant your thoughts in a different place. And I do have to remind myself of this often. I think that's why her saying it in that way was just so helpful, because I just can plant different seeds. And then I know my brain knows what I'm trying to get at there. This channel also helps me do this. There's nothing like having to practice what you preach, right? They say if you want to learn something, teach it. Well, I can attest to that. Finding community helped me do this. Putting myself in situations where I see others working through it, maybe a little further down the path than I am, others who maybe I can help a little bit because I'm further down the path than they are. Even if this is just virtually, it's one of the reasons why I do the vlogs, right? Even though they can be kind of boring. I want to show people that you can do things and you can live your life, and it can be a life that you can cultivate in the way that you want. Seeing others balance the grief with the joy, I think is really important, particularly if we have people that are trying to tell us we shouldn't be feeling the grief. We should only be in the joy, or opposite, right? Seeing people balance it can be grounding and validating. It validates the hurt, but gives space to the future, and that future can be better as a reminder from somebody who's been there, versus maybe it feeling more like a judgment or a declaration or a piece of advice or do this from somebody who doesn't have some lived experience. And when you receive a reminder from somebody like that, sometimes it can be helpful because you don't feel like you then maybe have to defend yourself or explain why you're feeling a certain way, because they probably have some awareness of what that feels like too. So maybe you can receive it a little bit different. Not that people who have kids cannot be supports. I just think community with people who have some lived experience can be helpful, particularly as we talk about evolving. And Again, when you're over a certain age, seeking out community with people who maybe are single or people who are childless, not by choice, often has to be an intentional act, which is like the rub, right? Because when you're feeling like crap, you often don't want to go put yourself out there in those situations. But challenge yourself and consider it, even if it's virtually. And the idea is environments where isn't it about fixing the problem, but accepting where you are and what is and what can be. So if you're having trouble being able to envision a different path, a path that is meaningful, purposeful, and fun without children, I really would challenge you to seek out some of these communities. Even if you're just lurking in the background, worldchildlessweek.net has some resources, Gateway has some resources, Childless Collective has some resources. As a real beginning type, this YouTube channel can be a resource. You're not necessarily interacting with me one-on-one. However, there's a community of people here. Exposing yourself to people who are a little further down the path or on the same path is really invaluable. So, while being childless not by choice definitely includes grief and loss, there are also some things that I feel like I've gained from this experience. Again, this is a part of the evolution, because if you would have asked me 5 years ago about this, I wouldn't even wanted to have this conversation. In fact, I would have been super irritated if somebody would have tried to have this conversation with me. So this is coming from a place of love and caring, and in some ways, some understanding. So these gains don't mean that the losses are no longer there and that I don't experience grief and loss or sadness, but I don't get stuck there. And I'm able to challenge that line of thinking a little bit. And I'm able to remind myself that that's not a fact. And my brain is able to pivot a little bit more away from that. So what are these things that I feel like I've gained, right? Well, this is not an exhaustive list, but a few. I do feel like I have some empathy for people that where things just didn't turn out the way they thought. I feel like I've gained the ability or learned the ability to really examine my life and what I want and be intentional around it versus feeling like I'm kind of on this conveyor belt and doing things because I just assumed I would always do those things. So I've gained some freedom and flexibility in the choices that I'm making about my life. Some of these include around my finances, my environment, where I live, what I do on a daily basis, maybe how I want to spend retirement. And probably most importantly, I've gained some perspective that life doesn't always turn out the way that you want. I think particularly in the United States, we have the kind of never give up. It'll happen if you just never, ever give up. And while I think that does serve a good purpose in a lot of instances, I also think, sometimes life is just hard and bad things happen to good people. And there's sometimes no rhyme or reason for it. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. But sometimes things just don't work out the way that you envisioned or planned on it. And it doesn't mean you're not blessed. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you did something wrong in a past life. It doesn't mean you did something wrong in this life. But disappointing things can happen to good people. And most of all, I think I've gained some insight into who I am and that my worth is not connected to who I'm attached to or some title that I have. I am me. And that is enough. You are you, and you are enough. Subscribe to Saunders Sisterhood for more videos for the single and for the childless, not by choice person.